Hey guys! So in the first part of the video, we learned about why we make such stupid decisions at times. And we learned also about System 1 and System 2 and how they operate within our mind. In this part of the video, we'll learn about two more things, or we'll be answering two more questions. The first question is, do we enjoy pleasure as much as we dislike pain? And how does this factor into our decision-making process? And the other question would be understanding that there are two selves, and how do these two selves differ? Answering these questions will be very important to make better decisions in our lives. So let's get right to it. The second question was, do we enjoy pleasure as much as we dislike pain? Conclusion first, no. We do not enjoy pleasure as much as we dislike pain. We actually dislike pain more than we enjoy pleasure. Now this just may seem like a wordplay, but let me try to explain what's actually happening in our minds and why Kahneman, the author of this book, came to that conclusion. In order to understand that better, we need to understand how our mind works with regards to expected value. Now let me give you a question to better understand this. So there are two scenarios that you can pick from. Scenario 1, you have an 80% chance of getting $100 and a 20% chance of getting only $10. And the second scenario is you getting $80 for sure. If you had the choice, which one would you choose? I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, that's 3 seconds for me. So if you're like most people, you would have chosen the second or safer option, the sure option, because you don't want to take the risk and become the 20% that can only get $10. You want to get the sure thing. What's interesting is that the expected value of the first scenario was higher. It's $82. The mathematical you would say, hey, that's higher. If the logical us should pick this option. But in fact, most people don't. And this was first discovered by a dude called Bernoulli. Then comes along Kahneman and he adds more to this story. He adds more flesh and he adds more context. For example, imagine there's Alan and there's Ben, and they both have $3 million. Do you think they're happy? Thing is, you don't really know. Imagine if Alan had $1 million yesterday, and now it's $3 million. And imagine if Ben had $5 million yesterday, and now it's $3 million. Obviously, Alan would be jumping in joy, whereas Ben would be on his knees crying. Now this is obvious, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know this. But what's really interesting is that the pain that Ben feels is larger than the happiness that Alan feels. In order to understand this better, let's look at one last example. There are two different problems. For problem 1, there are two options. The first option is you getting $900 for sure, and the second option is you having a 90% chance of getting $1,000 and a 10% chance of not getting anything. Now, the second problem also has two different options. The first option is you losing $900 for sure. And the second option is there being a 90% chance of you losing $1,000 and a 10% chance of you losing nothing. Now, I'll give you 5 to 10 seconds on this one, and tell me what option you would choose for both problem 1 and problem 2. Okay, that's enough time for this section. Okay. Now, if you're like most people, for the first problem, you would have chosen the first option, or the secure option, the sure option. Why would you want to risk being that 10% that gets nothing? You know, you want the sure $900, right? But if you're like most people, for the second problem, you would have chosen the second option. The second option being that you would risk losing $1,000 at a 90% chance because you think that you could be that 10% that loses nothing. So I just wanted you to be aware of the freaky choice that we just made. For problem 1, when we're considering upside potentials, what we did is choose the sure option because we didn't want to become the 10% that receives nothing. However, for problem 2, when we're faced with the difficult decision, instead of taking the loss of $900 for sure, we took the risk because we thought this time that we could be that extra 10% that actually doesn't have to lose anything. Now, what just happened? It is this simple. We hate losing more than we like gaining. Even though avoiding being hurt now could lead to worse consequences in the future. Now this graph explains prospect theory, and let's understand what this graph is trying to tell us. On the x-axis, what we see is the dollar amount, The farther we go to the right, the more dollar you gain, and the farther you go to the left, the more dollars you lose. The y-axis shows you the utility or the happiness you would feel. Obviously, if you win $100, then your utility would go up. And if you lose $100, your utility will go down. But there are two interesting things that you need to have in mind when you see this graph. The first is that it is S-shaped. So that shows you the diminishing sensitivity. So basically, the happiness that you would feel with the first $100 will be different from the 10th $100 that you would get. And the second and very interesting thing is that the slopes differ. 1 unit, or having $100 plus, brings you utility that is less than if you lose that same $100. The implication here is that we are more motivated to avoid losses than to seek out gains, because negativity trumps positivity. Now, there are some people who are more optimistic than others, but we are designed or programmed to a certain extent to think more negatively than positively. For example, imagine a bowl full of delicious berries, and imagine there's a disgusting cockroach right in between. Imagine there's another big bowl of disgusting cockroaches, all just writhing all over and having a blueberry on top. Was your expression for the first example like this? Did that expression change for the second example? Probably not, right? So that's the very nature of humans. Even though there are 100 good things, we usually come back to the memory that actually was most distasteful or that was most painful for us. We're designed that way. We tend to remember the bad moments more than we remember the good moments. So there are two key takeaways here. The first is that what hurts us now may be in fact better for us than having to postpone that pain to a later date. Sometimes you gotta face pain to prevent the situation from getting worse. And the second is that sometimes as individuals or as organizations, we tend to set a lower goal because the thought of us losing or the thought of us not accomplishing our goal is greater than us actually achieving that goal. So what we do to ourselves and what we do to organizations is set a lower goal on purpose so we could feel, we don't have to make that big of an effort to achieve anything. Now, there's this very corny expression that I like. It's something like, shoot for the sun, or one of those big faraway places, and even though you don't actually get to reach that place, you'll fall on one of the stars nearby. Don't be afraid of being hurt. Don't be afraid of, having to be disappointed at times, because that's life and that's the journey that life brings you. At the end of the rainbow, there is bound to be golden pot. Now, we come to the third question, understanding that there are two cells within us, and that these two cells have different interests. So let's kick this session off with a famous quote by Jeremy Bentham. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. Yes, the good old utilitarianism. The more pleasure and the less pain, the better. Yay. But what if I asked you that the way that we conceive or understand pleasure and pain differs at the same time within us? So there's a part of us that says this is pleasurable, and there's another part of us that says this is not pleasurable. No, I'm not crazy, and I'm not trying to say things like I didn't like alcohol in the past, but now I do. I'm trying to say that there are two selves within us that have different interests on how we perceive events. So Kahneman explains this as the experience utility and the decision utility. Now things, I don't know why all these smart people, they make such complicated, terminology to explain something so simple. So basically what he's trying to say is there's the present self and the experience self, or the past me. So there's the present me, the now me who remembers things that happened in the past, and there's the past me who actually lived that event. And the way that we perceive reality is very different. So there's this amazing example. So imagine that I sit you in a room in front of me, and I have a bucket full of ice water, and I tell you, put your hand in the ice bucket water, and then you do so, and you stay there for 60 seconds, and by the end of the 60 minutes you just feel so much pain because it's so cold, and you writhe in pain, and then you remove your hand and you dry it and you warm it. Now 5 minutes passes and I tell you, put your hand in the ice bucket water again, but now this time it's 90 seconds. The only difference being in that the last 30 seconds of this experiment I put in a little bit of warm water, just enough so that the pain level you feel is slightly less. Now I ask you a question. Then the logical part of you would think, obviously then I would like to suffer less, so I would choose the first experiment. But for the people who actually experienced the experiment, who actually lived through it, most of the people actually chose the latter, even though it was longer. Kahneman describes that there were two patterns taking place. The first is the peak-end rule, and the second is the duration negation. So basically, for the present us, when we think about something in the past, there are only two moments that we actually remember. The first being the peak of the memory, so how painful it was or how pleasurable it was, how sad we were or how happy we were. And the second is how that memory ends. And the duration negation basically means that the duration of that memory doesn't really matter, because we don't really take that into consideration when we remember something. Now this has very interesting implications, because the obvious question is, who should we listen to? Should we listen to the present you? Or should we take into consideration the past you? For example, imagine you're a doctor and you are treating a patient in acute pain. He's going through a lot of trouble right now. And you had two different choices. The first choice was to heal him right away, but right at the point where he's feeling the most pain. And the second option would be to prolong the process of operation, let's say, but tone down that pain. So for the first case, the patient will remember the procedure as being horrible and rancid, because the pain will be the only thing that that person will remember. But for the second experiment, it will be longer, that is true, but that patient will not actually remember the duration. So as a doctor, what would be the good option? What would be the right choice to make? The thing is, there is no clear answer. So let's think of one more example. Imagine for a second that you were the CEO of a company and had the tough responsibility to lay off people. How would you do so in a way that minimizes the pain your employees feel, while at the same time decrease the negative impact the layoff will have on the morale of the remaining employees to maintain manufacturing capability and service quality? So that's it for this part of the video. In the first part of the video, we understood why we make such stupid decisions at times, and we understood the complex nature of System 1 and System 2. And in this part of the video, we understood that we actually dislike pain more than we like pleasure. And the third thing we learned is that there are two selves within us, and these two selves perceive pain and pleasure from two different focal points. So I hope you enjoyed learning all these things with me. It was definitely very enjoyable for me to share all these stories that I learned with you. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. So I'll see you in our next video with greater and better content. Thank you for being with me up to this point. Goodbye!